The air, thick with the mingled scents of beeswax, blooming heather, and the distant, earthy aroma of farm animals, would have been a constant, comforting presence. Imagine, if you will, a small clearing on the edge of a sprawling forest, or perhaps a quiet nook beside a gently flowing river, a place where people, not so long ago, would gather not for boisterous revelry, but for a far more measured and essential exchange. This was the realm of the medieval honey fair, a seemingly simple concept, yet one that, over centuries, laid down intricate foundational threads for the very idea of market regulation in Europe. To truly understand how this came to be, we must first examine its origins, tracing back to a time when honey was not merely a sweetener, but a vital commodity, a source of light and a cornerstone of medieval economy and daily life. The story of the medieval honey fair is deeply intertwined with the lifeblood of the European countryside, particularly during the High Middle Ages, roughly from the 12th to the 15th centuries. Honey, in this era, was far more than just a delightful addition to porridge or a natural remedy for coughs. It was, in many respects, the primary sweetener available to the vast majority of the population. Sugar, derived from sugarcane, was a luxury commodity, expensive and largely inaccessible to anyone outside the highest echelons of nobility and the clergy. Consequently, honey filled a crucial niche, providing a much-needed sweetness to the often bland and monotonous diet of commoners and lords alike. It was used in baking, in brewing mead and ale, and in the preservation of fruits and other foodstuffs. Beyond its culinary uses, honey held significant practical importance. Beeswax, the byproduct of honey production, was the sole source of reliable and consistent light for centuries. Candles made from beeswax were prized for their clean burn, their pleasant, subtle fragrance, and the absence of the acrid smoke and dripping fat produced by tallow candles. These beeswax candles illuminated homes, monasteries, churches, and workshops, allowing for work and study to continue after sundown. They were essential for religious ceremonies, for manuscript illumination in scriptoria, and for any household that wished to extend its waking hours. Consequently, the availability and quality of both honey and beeswax were of considerable economic and social consequence. The production of honey in the medieval period was a multifaceted endeavor. While some honey was undoubtedly collected from wild swarms of bees nesting in hollow trees or rocky crevices, the more significant and consistent supply came from beekeeping or apiculture. Monasteries played a particularly crucial role in the development and practice of beekeeping. Monks, with their disciplined routines, their dedicated labor, and their often extensive landholdings, were ideally positioned to cultivate apiaries. They understood the importance of the bees' work, not just for honey and wax, but also for pollination, which was essential for their agricultural endeavors, particularly the cultivation of fruit orchards and vegetable gardens. Records from monasteries, such as the detailed estate accounts of St. Gall in the 9th century, already show significant bee populations and the production of large quantities of honey and wax. These monastic apiaries were often meticulously managed, with monks developing a deep understanding of bee behavior, hive management, and the optimal placement of hives to maximize honey yields. Beyond the monastic communities, independent beekeepers, often rural farmers and cottagers, also contributed to the honey supply. Their methods might have been less formalized than those of the monks, but their knowledge of local flora and bee behavior was often profound, passed down through generations. They would utilize various types of hives, from simple skeps woven from straw or rushes, to more elaborate wooden box hives. The process of harvesting honey was a delicate one, often undertaken in the late summer or early autumn, after the main nectar flow had subsided. It involved carefully opening the hives, removing the combs laden with honey, and then, in a process that required considerable skill and courage, persuading the bees to vacate the combs, often through the judicious use of smoke. The collected combs would then be processed, either by pressing them to extract the liquid honey, or by gently warming them to allow the honey to flow. The beeswax would be rendered from the remaining comb material. The sheer demand for honey and beeswax, coupled with the labor-intensive nature of their production, naturally led to their emergence as significant commodities in medieval trade. However, The unregulated nature of trade in these early periods presented a considerable challenge. Without established standards or oversight, buyers were vulnerable to a range of deceptive practices. Honey could be adulterated with water, sugar, when it became more available, or other less desirable substances to increase its volume and weight. Beeswax could be mixed with other fats or resins, diminishing its quality for candle making or other uses. These fraudulent practices not only cheated the consumer, but also undermined the reputation of honest producers and hindered the smooth functioning of trade. It is within this context of burgeoning trade and the inherent need for trust and fairness that the concept of the honey fair began to take shape. These were not simply open markets where anyone could sell anything. Instead, they were specialized gatherings, often held at specific times of the year and in designated locations, where the trade in honey and beeswax was the primary, if not exclusive, focus. The very structure of these fairs was designed to foster a sense of order and reliability. They were often organized by lords of the manor, town councils, or religious institutions, entities that had a vested interest in ensuring fair trade within their jurisdictions. These organizers understood that a well-regulated market, where buyers could be reasonably assured of the quality and purity of the goods they purchased, would attract more traders, stimulate economic activity, and generate revenue through tolls and market fees. The genesis of these specialized fairs can be traced to local markets and assemblies, where honey and beeswax were traded alongside other agricultural produce. However, as the volume of trade increased and the need for more formalized oversight became apparent, these dedicated honey fairs emerged as distinct entities. Their locations were often strategically chosen. Some were situated near major monastic centers, which were significant producers and consumers of honey products. Others were located at crossroads of important trade routes, or in towns and cities that were developing as commercial hubs. The timing of these fairs was also significant, often coinciding with the periods immediately following the main honey harvests, when producers had fresh goods to sell and when buyers were eager to stock up for the coming seasons. The operational framework of a medieval honey fair was characterized by a series of carefully considered rules and practices, all aimed at ensuring fairness and preventing fraud. One of the most crucial aspects was the presence of appointed officials, often referred to as market masters, inspectors, or aldermen, who were tasked with overseeing the proceedings. These individuals were typically respected members of the community, possessing a good understanding of the commodities being traded, and a reputation for impartiality. Their primary responsibility was to ensure that all goods presented for sale met certain established standards of quality and purity. When a beekeeper or merchant arrived at the fair with their honey, it would typically be presented for inspection. The inspectors would examine the honey visually, looking for signs of adulteration or impurities. They would also conduct simple practical tests to gauge its consistency and purity. For instance, they might observe how the honey flowed, its viscosity, and its color. They might also test its solubility in water or its behavior when heated. These were not sophisticated laboratory tests, but rather time-tested methods that, in the hands of experienced inspectors, could effectively detect many common forms of fraud. The inspection process for beeswax was similarly thorough. Inspectors would examine the color and texture of the wax, checking for any signs of added foreign substances. They might also assess its melting point and its malleability. The purity of beeswax was particularly important for candle makers, as impure wax would result in inferior candles that burned poorly and produced excessive smoke. Therefore, the inspectors played a vital role in safeguarding the integrity of this essential commodity. Beyond the physical inspection of goods, the honey fairs also established rules regarding weights and measures. This was a critical element in preventing fraudulent practices, as traders could be cheated by being sold goods that were short in weight or volume. Fair organizers would often provide standardized weights and measures, or appoint officials to verify the accuracy of those brought by traders. The use of official measures ensured that transactions were conducted on a level playing field, where both buyer and seller could be confident that they were receiving or giving the correct quantity of goods. Another important feature of the honey fair was the regulation of pricing. While a completely fixed price might not have been universally enforced, there were often mechanisms in place to guide pricing and prevent excessive price gouging. This could involve the establishment of fair prices based on prevailing market conditions, or the prevention of speculative hoarding of honey and wax to artificially inflate prices. The goal was to ensure that essential commodities remained accessible to the wider population, preventing shortages and economic hardship. The organization of the fair also involved the designation of specific areas for different types of traders. Honey producers might be allocated one section, while beeswax merchants had another. This spatial organization facilitated the flow of trade and made it easier for inspectors to conduct their duties. It also provided a sense of order and clarity for buyers, allowing them to navigate the fair efficiently and locate the goods they sought. The legal and administrative framework surrounding these fairs was often overseen by the manorial court or the town council. Disputes that arose during the fair could be brought before these authorities for resolution. Punishments for those caught engaging in fraudulent practices were often severe, ranging from fines and confiscation of goods to public shaming, banishment from the market, or even more serious corporal punishments. These deterrents played a significant role in encouraging honest dealing and maintaining the reputation of the fair. The existence of specialized honey fairs had a profound impact on the development of market regulation in Europe. Firstly, they provided a tangible model for organized commerce. The principles of inspection, standardization of weights and measures, and dispute resolution that were honed in these fairs became the building blocks for more comprehensive market regulations in later centuries. They demonstrated the practical benefits of oversight and the importance of establishing trust between buyers and sellers. Secondly, these fairs contributed to the rise of specialized trades and professions. The inspectors themselves gained expertise in evaluating the quality of honey and beeswax, and their role became increasingly professionalized. Furthermore, the consistent demand and reliable trading environment fostered by the fairs allowed for the growth of dedicated merchants and craftsmen who dealt primarily in honey-derived products. Thirdly, the honey fairs played a role in the development of early forms of consumer protection. By actively working to prevent adulteration and fraud, they provided a degree of assurance to buyers, enabling them to make purchases with greater confidence. This early form of consumer protection was not driven by abstract principles of fairness, but by the practical necessity of fostering a healthy and productive economy. The geographical reach of these honey fairs was considerable. While many were local or regional events, some grew to become significant hubs of trade, attracting merchants from far afield. For instance, fairs held in port cities or in regions with particularly productive beekeeping traditions could draw traders from across national borders. The movement of honey and beeswax and the accompanying commercial practices thus contributed to the broader networks of medieval European trade. The economics of honey fairs were also multifaceted. The organizers, whether lords or town councils, levied tolls and market fees on traders. These fees provided a source of revenue that could be used to maintain the market infrastructure, pay the inspectors, and contribute to the general revenues of the governing body. For the producers, the fairs offered a reliable outlet for their goods, allowing them to convert their labor and resources into tangible income. For the consumers, the fairs provided access to essential commodities at fair prices, contributing to their well-being and their ability to sustain their households and businesses. Consider the intricate details of the trade itself. Honey was typically sold in various forms. There was comb honey, where the intact honey-filled combs were sold, often wrapped in cloth or placed in woven baskets. There was strained honey, which had been carefully extracted from the combs and was sold in pottery jars or wooden containers. The quality of honey could vary significantly based on the floral sources from which the bees had collected nectar. Honey from heather, for example, had a distinct flavor and aroma, as did honey from clover, linden trees, or wildflowers. Buyers would often develop preferences for honey from specific regions or floral sources, and the fairs provided an opportunity to select from a variety of these regional specialties. Beeswax was also traded in various forms. It was often sold in cakes or blocks, which could be roughly shaped by hand or molded into more regular forms. The color of the beeswax could range from a pale yellow to a deep golden hue, depending on the age of the combs and the processing methods used. Whiter wax was generally considered to be of higher quality, particularly for the production of fine candles. The social aspect of these fairs, while not overtly dramatic, was nonetheless significant. They represented moments of concentrated economic activity, bringing together individuals from different walks of life, farmers bringing their produce, merchants with their wares, and the local populace all converged in a shared space for a common purpose. While the focus was on trade, there was also an element of social interaction, the exchange of news and information, and the forging of relationships that could extend beyond the confines of the market day. The evolution of these honey fairs was not a static process. As trade expanded and societal structures changed, so too did the organization and regulation of these markets. The rise of chartered towns in the later Middle Ages, with their own legal systems and governance structures, often led to the integration of market regulations into broader urban law. The principles established at the specialized honey fairs were absorbed and adapted, becoming part of the increasingly sophisticated legal and economic framework of medieval Europe. The administrative burden of managing a honey fair was not insignificant. It required planning, the allocation of resources, and the consistent enforcement of rules. The organizers had to ensure adequate security for the traders and their goods, especially during periods of potential unrest or during large gatherings. The collection of tolls and fees had to be managed efficiently to avoid disputes. The appointment and supervision of inspectors were crucial to maintaining the reputation of the fair. The impact of these fairs on the everyday lives of medieval people cannot be overstated. For the beekeeper, it was a vital opportunity to sell their hard-earned produce and secure income. For the innkeeper, the availability of honey meant a steady supply for sweetening drinks and for cooking. For the scribe or scholar, it meant the availability of good quality beeswax candles for their work. For the average family, it meant access to a much-needed sweetener that made their diet more palatable and their lives a little brighter, literally, in the case of the candles. The history of the medieval honey fair is a testament to the human capacity for organization and regulation, even in the absence of highly centralized authorities. It demonstrates how practical needs can give rise to sophisticated systems of governance and trade. The very notion of ensuring quality, preventing fraud, and establishing fair dealings, concepts that are fundamental to modern commerce, found some of their earliest and most systematic expressions in these seemingly humble gatherings. The meticulous nature of medieval record-keeping, particularly in monastic institutions and town archives, provides us with glimpses into the workings of these fairs. Accounts of tolls collected, records of market disputes, and inventories of goods traded all offer valuable insights into the economic and administrative aspects of these events. While often presented in a dry, factual manner, these documents, when pieced together, reveal a rich tapestry of medieval commerce and social organization. Consider the specific types of fraud that might have been prevalent. In honey, beyond simple dilution, there was the possibility of mixing in syrups made from fruits or grains, which would alter the taste and texture. For beeswax, the admixture of animal fats, such as tallow or lard, would significantly reduce its value and its suitability for candle making. These adulterations were not always easy to detect with the naked eye, and the role of skilled inspectors was therefore paramount. The evolution of the hives themselves also played a role. As beekeeping techniques improved, and as more efficient hive designs were developed, the volume and consistency of honey and beeswax production increased. This growth in supply further fueled the need for organized markets and regulatory frameworks to manage the expanding trade. The influence of these fairs extended beyond the immediate economic sphere. They contributed to the development of a shared understanding of quality and value. When buyers consistently found that honey from a particular fair met their expectations and when producers found that honest dealings led to repeat business, a form of trust and reputation was built. This intangible asset was as important as the tangible commodities being traded. The broader impact on the development of commercial law is also noteworthy. The practices and precedents set by the honey fairs helped to shape the legal traditions that governed trade in subsequent centuries. The emphasis on oaths, on sworn testimony in disputes, and on the concept of market franchises all have roots in the organizational principles of these early markets. The meticulous details of daily life in medieval Europe are often obscured by the broader narratives of wars and royal successions. However, the history of the honey fair reminds us that the fabric of society was woven from countless threads of everyday commerce and practical innovation. The sweet scent of honey and the steady flame of a beeswax candle were not just pleasant sensory experiences. They were the products of intricate systems of production, trade, and nascent regulation, all contributing to the functioning and development of medieval society. The transition from a purely localized system of exchange to more formalized markets with appointed officials and established rules was a gradual but significant one. The honey fairs acted as crucial stepping stones in this process, providing the practical experience and the foundational principles that would inform later commercial developments. They highlight that the desire for fair trade and reliable goods is a perennial aspect of human endeavor, and that the mechanisms to achieve these goals are often forged in the crucible of practical necessity. The dedicated nature of the honey fair also meant that specialized knowledge and expertise could flourish. Inspectors developed a keen eye for adulteration, merchants became adept at sourcing the best quality products, and producers refined their techniques to meet the demands of a discerning market. This specialization contributed to the overall efficiency and effectiveness of the medieval economy. The geographical distribution of these fairs likely mirrored the prevalence of beekeeping traditions. Regions with abundant flowering plants, such as meadows, forests, and agricultural lands with a variety of crops, would have been more conducive to beekeeping and thus more likely to host thriving honey fairs. Monastic estates, with their often extensive and well-managed lands, were also significant centers for honey production and therefore for these specialized markets. The continuity of these fairs over extended periods underscores their importance. While specific locations and organizational details might have varied, the underlying principles of regulated trade in honey and beeswax persisted for centuries, adapting to changing economic and social conditions. This endurance speaks to the fundamental utility and effectiveness of the model. The untold story aspect of the medieval honey fair lies in its often overlooked contribution to the grander narrative of economic history. While we readily discuss the rise of great trading cities or the development of complex financial instruments, the quiet, persistent evolution of market regulation, as exemplified by these specialized fairs, forms a crucial foundational layer. It is in these detailed, fact-based accounts of everyday commerce that we can truly appreciate the gradual, yet profound development of economic systems. The careful adherence to standards, even rudimentary ones, in the honey fairs provided a baseline of expectation. Buyers learned what to look for, and producers learned what was expected of them. This mutual understanding, fostered through repeated interactions in a regulated environment, was essential for the growth of trust and for the expansion of trade beyond immediate kin or village. The legacy of these honey fairs can be seen in the continued importance of quality control and standardization in markets today. While the methods have evolved dramatically, the underlying principle of ensuring that consumers receive what they expect and that producers are rewarded for quality remains a cornerstone of fair trade. The medieval honey fair, with its dedicated officials and its focus on purity, was an early, practical manifestation of this enduring ideal. The detailed accounts of the inspection process, the types of adulterations, and the punishments for fraud, while perhaps sounding mundane to some, are precisely what reveal the depth of the historical reality. They are the granular details that paint a vivid, albeit calm and unhurried picture of medieval economic life and the slow, deliberate development of regulatory practices. These are the very elements that can so effectively lull the mind into a state of focused yet relaxed contemplation, making for ideal listening during periods of rest. The economic impact extended beyond the immediate producers and consumers. The presence of a well-regulated market attracted merchants and traders, contributing to the growth and prosperity of the towns and cities that hosted these fairs. The revenue generated from tolls and fees could be reinvested in public works, infrastructure, or the support of local governance, further enhancing the economic well-being of the community. The gradual move towards more formal and written regulations in market towns, particularly from the 13th century onwards, often drew upon the precedents and practices established in earlier, more specialized fairs. The concept of a chartered market, with its own rules and regulations, was a direct descendant of the organizational principles that guided these honey fairs. The sheer volume of honey and beeswax traded across Europe during this period, while difficult to quantify precisely, was undoubtedly substantial. It fueled the growth of industries, supported religious institutions, and provided a basic necessity for households. The fairs were the conduits through which this vital trade flowed, and their regulatory framework ensured that this flow was as smooth and as trustworthy as possible. The detailed understanding of different floral sources and their impact on honey characteristics was a form of specialized knowledge developed within the context of these fairs. Beekeepers learned to identify the best foraging grounds, and buyers learned to appreciate the nuanced flavors and qualities of honey derived from various blossoms. This nuanced understanding contributed to the sophistication of the trade. The role of the church, while primarily as a producer and consumer of honey products, also extended to providing a framework of order and morality that underpinned fair dealing. The concept of the just price, while subject to much theological debate, did influence the expectations surrounding market transactions. The meticulous recording of market regulations in town charters and guild statutes often reflects the practical lessons learned from years of experience in specialized markets like the honey fairs. The detailed stipulations regarding weights, measures, and the quality of goods were not arbitrary, but were born out of necessity and the desire to prevent the recurrence of fraud. The social implications of fair trade were also significant. When markets were perceived as fair and reliable, they fostered a sense of community and shared prosperity. Conversely, markets plagued by fraud and exploitation could lead to social unrest and economic hardship. The honey fairs, by promoting fair dealing, contributed to a more stable and equitable economic environment. The enduring appeal of honey itself, as a natural and beneficial product, ensured a consistent demand that supported the longevity of these specialized markets. This sustained demand, coupled with the practical challenges of production, made the regulation of its trade a matter of ongoing importance. The detailed examination of medieval honey fairs reveals a layer of historical complexity that is often overlooked. These were not simply chaotic gatherings, but rather organized events with specific rules and purposes, designed to facilitate trade and protect participants. The careful attention to detail in their operation, from the inspection of goods to the resolution of disputes, is a testament to their significance in the broader development of European commerce. The transition from beeswax candles to other forms of illumination, such as oil lamps and later manufactured candles, did eventually diminish the economic importance of beeswax. However, during the medieval period, its role was paramount, and the regulation of its trade was a vital concern. The narrative of the honey fair is one of gradual, incremental development. It is a story not of sudden revolutions, but of practical solutions evolving over time in response to economic needs and societal challenges. The calm, methodical unfolding of these developments is, in itself, a characteristic that lends itself to a soothing, detailed historical narrative. The principles of market oversight, established in these early fairs, laid the groundwork for future developments in areas such as weights and measures legislation, food safety regulations, and consumer protection laws. The historical lineage of these modern concepts can be traced back to the practical measures implemented at medieval honey fairs. The meticulous descriptions of the types of honey, the subtle variations in color, aroma, and flavor that distinguish different floral sources are indicative of a sophisticated understanding of the product. This level of detail, when explored calmly, can immerse the listener in the sensory world of the medieval marketplace. The story of the honey fair is, in essence, a story of trust being built through regulation. It is a narrative of how practical measures and organized oversight can foster fair trade, stimulate economic activity, and contribute to the stability and prosperity of communities. The detailed examination of these mechanisms, presented in a calm and even tone, offers a unique and fascinating glimpse into the foundations of European commerce. The gradual refinement of beekeeping techniques, from simpler skeps to more complex hives, influenced the volume and consistency of honey and beeswax production. This evolution in production methods, in turn, necessitated a corresponding evolution in market regulation to manage the increased flow of goods. The role of the fair as a point of convergence for different groups, producers, merchants, consumers, and officials, created a dynamic environment where economic interests and regulatory frameworks interacted. This interaction was a crucial driver of innovation and adaptation in market practices. The careful documentation of market rules and procedures, often found in town charters and guild ordinances, provides us with a detailed understanding of the legal and administrative structures that underpinned these fairs. The precise wording of these regulations, while perhaps seeming dry, is crucial for understanding the intent and implementation of market oversight. The development of specialized roles, such as that of the market inspector, signifies a growing professionalization of trade governance. These individuals, with their accumulated knowledge and experience, played a vital part in ensuring the smooth and fair operation of the market. The legacy of the medieval honey fair lies not just in its economic impact, but in its contribution to the development of administrative and legal principles that continue to shape our commercial world. The emphasis on fairness, transparency, and accountability, all nurtured within these early markets, remains central to modern notions of good governance and responsible trade. The detailed accounts of the methods used to test the purity of honey and beeswax, while rudimentary by today's standards, were sophisticated for their time and effectively addressed the most common forms of fraud. The calm, factual description of these tests can be particularly soothing, focusing on the methodical nature of the process. The ebb and flow of trade, influenced by factors such as agricultural yields, climatic conditions, and the broader economic climate, would have necessitated a degree of flexibility and adaptation in the management of the honey fairs. The records often reflect these adjustments, showcasing the practical challenges faced by market organizers. The story of the honey fair is a reminder that the foundations of modern commerce were laid over centuries through countless practical innovations and gradual refinements. The detailed factual exploration of these early market mechanisms offers a profound and, for our purposes, wonderfully calming insight into the history of trade and regulation. The interconnectedness of the various elements, beekeeping, honey and beeswax production, trade, regulation, and consumption, creates a complex but ultimately harmonious system. The calm, detailed narration of these interconnected processes can provide a sense of order and coherence that is conducive to relaxation and sleep. The inherent logic and methodical progression of these historical developments, when presented without sensationalism, offer a gentle yet compelling narrative.